Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to episode 3 of Opening Basics. Today in this video we're going to take a look at one of the most famous of the lines in the Sicilian dragon, the dragon variation. So I'm just going to go through the first 5 moves of the main line of the Sicilian, and that is e4, c5, knight f3, d6, and I'll be looking at alternatives in other videos. d4, the open Sicilian, takes, and now knight f6 attacking the center pawn, knight c3 defending. And here in the main line, black can choose whether to go in the into the Najdorf, which we looked at last week with in the last video with a6. There's also knight c6, the classical line, or e6, the Scheveningen. But in this video, we're looking at g6, the dragon variation. And the dragon gets its name from this pawn formation. I guess these the squiggly line of pawns reminds someone of the dragon. Maybe that the head is here and this is the tail. Or maybe this is the head and this is the tail. I'm not sure. But if you look at the constellation of Draco the dragon in the sky, it has a wavery line sort of like this. Anyway, it seems like on the surface it looks like a very logical way to play. For one thing, the d6 pawn is defended. Because unlike the Najdorf, this pawn is not going anywhere for a while. This is going to stay there. And in spite of the fact that these pawns have been kept back in the center, he's managed with the 2 pawn moves that he's made, well, I guess 3 counting the c-pawn, to open up lines for both bishops. So the dark squared bishop will get a good diagonal here. The light squared bishop has a line onto these squares. And there's room for his pieces here. So it seems like black has pretty much solved all of his problems. But appearances can be deceiving, and the difficulty with the dragon is that white has a number of options for launching a full-scale attack on the king side, and it can be a very sharp opening. So there are 2 main moves for white at this point, and one of them is bishop e3, the main move, and the other is bishop e2. And I'm going to look at this one first. Similar to in the Najdorf, when you play bishop e2, white is choosing not to go into the main line, but to play a more positional and slower setup, where he's hoping for long-term advantage. He'll have more space in the center and try and take advantage of that. But black has long-term compensation in in a very compact pawn structure, and if he doesn't get into much trouble in the middle game here, then he can look forward to a very solid position in the endgame. So the main line goes here with bishop g7 castling, knight c6, just developing your pieces, getting this out, knight e3. And now notice the importance of the bishop and the queen lining up on this g4 square, so there's no possibility of the knight hopping into g4, which is commonly the case when you have the bishop on e3. So black castles, and this is a good place to stop. There's a couple of different ideas for white. He can try and move forward in the center. Maybe he could put his king to the side and push the f-pawn, and then maybe play for e5 later, or maybe f5 with a king side attack. He can also lift his bishop up to d2 and threaten to exchange off the dark squared bishop. Black has ideas in this position too. In particular, anything he can do to enhance the power of this bishop on the long diagonal is a good idea. Sometimes involving the queen coming out to one of these squares. This bishop has a good post here on d7. And he can also think of launching his pawns forward just to soften up the queen side, maybe chase this knight away and weaken the e-pawn, and also open up a line onto the b-pawn. So typical kind of strategies for both sides. Oh, I should mention also that, let's erase some of these arrows here, that at this point it's not obvious, but there is half open c-file, and so a lot of times there's going to be a rook coming here to the c-file and putting pressure, and maybe even the rook sacrificing itself for the knight on c6, which is really a key defender in this position. So those are some of the ideas for black, and the play can continue from there. So this is a sort of position, well, let's go back to it, where white has the usual sort of opening edge, nothing too nothing too great, and so nothing for black to really fear, and an interesting game from this point could ensue with chances for both sides. But let's go back to the main line now, and in this position, after let's see, it was go all the way back to the characteristic move of the dragon, g6, bishop e3 right here is the main reply. And this sets up something that in the dragon is called the Yugoslav attack, or begins or introduces the Yugoslav attack. It's the same idea or the same pawn and piece formation as in the English attack in the Najdorf that we looked at in the previous video. So I'm not sure which came first, the English attack or the Yugoslav attack, but you know, some Yugoslav grandmasters studied this line against the dragon, so that's how it got the name of the Yugoslav attack. And maybe they were stealing ideas from the English attack, or maybe it was vice versa. Maybe the English grandmasters were stealing ideas from the Yugoslav attack. But the idea is to get the queen here on d2 supporting the bishop, have these pawns here. This keeps the knight out of the g4 square and later supports these pawn pushes. And it's just a great attacking setup for white, and we'll go into that in a little bit. Let's back up just a second. At this point, right after bishop e3, you may be wondering why black doesn't play knight g4 immediately. So, well, let's go ahead and put it on the board and see if you can figure out the reason for yourself. There's actually a tactic here, and the reason why white is free to develop his bishop to e3 immediately is because this move is basically not playable. If you want to pause the video and guess what the answer is, or see if you can figure it out, I mean. Okay, white has the shot here, bishop to b5 check. And you see the problem is this bishop is defending the knight, this queen is attacking it. So this bishop can't just block the check because the queen will take the knight. And similarly, the knight, if the knight blocks the check, then the queen will take the knight. So the best try is knight here. So now that the knight is defended, but now there's a problem on c6. After knight c6, white can just grab that knight, and after the exchange, he's got a fork here. So bishop d7, he's in check. He's got to do something about that still. And if the queen takes the knight here, then black can take the bishop, but you can take the rook instead. And so he doesn't lose the whole piece, but he loses the exchange. And he also lost a pawn on c6. So this is still quite good for white. So the line might continue. Knight takes here, pawn takes, queen takes, and white's turn to move. White is a pawn up and also has the exchange, and black doesn't have any compensation. He has no advantage in development or anything. So that's just winning for white. So you got to watch out for this knight g4 move. It's a common idea in the Sicilian to play knight g4 whenever you see this bishop on e3, but it just doesn't work in this case, and in other cases where this bishop b5 check might be played. So that's why knight g4 is not played here, but bishop g7 is. And now f3. So this prevents the knight from coming to g4 once and for all. After bishop f8, the bishop b5 check idea no longer works quite as well because the king can always run over to f8, and so black does not lose a piece. It's not clear if that's good for black, but in the long run, f3 is a good move to play anyway. It's going to support the move g4 and later h4 with the attack of the pawns, and it also shores up the center as well as keeping a knight out of the g4 square. So the normal way for black to continue here is either with castling or knight c6. These lines often transpose, say knight c6, queen d2, setting up this battery, and castling. And now there are two main moves for white here. And here I'll play the slightly less common move first. Castling queenside is not quite so common as just playing bishop c4, which is the main move and how the Yugoslav attack continues. And the reason is black has the reply d5 here. So there are other moves, but if black plays something other than d5, white is sort of getting a free move in the Yugoslav attack. He gets to keep his bishop back here, he can push his pawns forward, and he can maybe deploy this bishop later along the diagonal where it's going to do the most good, not necessarily committing it to c4. So to take advantage of the missing bishop on c4, black plays d5 immediately. And this leads to some pretty interesting play. White can take the pawn, and black takes back with the knight. And now there's one intermediate move that's important for white to play. If he just takes the knight on d5, queen takes, it's just a very even position, maybe even a little better for black, actually, with his pieces out and a good bishop. So this intermediate move is really important. He's got to play knight takes c6 here, with the attack on white's queen, and this fractures black's pawns on the queen side, and it's the basis for white's advantage in this line, which is fairly small. This is a decent way for black to play. And then he plays the move bishop d4 here, and black will play e5, and the play will continue from there. Black does not want to give up this good bishop. He wants to keep this and hopefully increase the pressure on this diagonal. So e5 is just temporarily blocking the line of the bishop, but he can push it out of the way to e4 when he wants to open up that diagonal again. So, and it preserves this bishop for now and kicks white's bishop. So that's how it would continue. If we back up, it's actually a mistake. It's a tempting move to take on d5 here, but this really doesn't work. If you think you're winning a pawn, this is very tricky. Black has the move. You would never guess this move, but black has the move queen c7. So black is down a pawn, but not only that, he seems to be not bothering to defend the rook in the corner by just moving the queen out of the way. Black wants to keep the queens on. He's got an open board with rooks and bishops, and that's what he's playing for. He's got a lot of activity with his pieces. And if white does take the rook, the trick is the bishop comes out here to f5, threatening checkmate. So, the queen can't get back to defend. There's only one move here. The queen has to take the rook with check, so he doesn't lose the rook. And then rook d2, so he doesn't lose the queen, I mean. And then rook d2 defends. And if we look at the material balance, there's a queen against two rooks, and white is also a pawn up. So it seems like the two rooks are usually worth more than a queen, and he has an extra pawn. It seems like materially white should be up a couple of points. But in fact, black has a very strong attack. He's just got all his positions in almost their ideal squares. There's a mate threat on here all the time, and there'll be another threat on b2 as well if the queen just shifts over to the b file. So very dangerous situation for black, and actually the computer rates this as even. So white, playing for an advantage, is not going to play that way. And if he does, if you're the black player and white plays that way, just remember this queen c7 move. Rather than, if you just trade queens here, then white is just a pawn up for nothing. So you really have to play actively here with queen c7. Okay, so that is enough about the castle queenside line. Let's back up. I meant to go backwards. Right here in this position, white has a choice between castling queenside or playing the bishop to c4. Let's back up just a second to the point where g6 was played. Just so you want to have these moves firmly in mind. The order, as you see, is very important. So it's g6 rather. We're in the dragon. Now it's bishop e3. It is bishop to g7, very logically developing. There's f3, keeping the knight out of g4 and preparing the attack. There's knight c6, developing. There's queen d2, setting up this characteristic diamond shape formation with the pieces and the tactic on h6. There's castling, defends the bishop. And now here is the point where white can either castle queenside or play bishop c4. And bishop c4 is the main line here. So after bishop c4, the move typically played is bishop to d7, and now castling queenside. And now rook to c8, putting the rook on the c-file, very characteristic idea, and the bishop drops back immediately. Black is going to get a nice tempo on the bishop at some point, so the bishop wants to go back to where it's secure on the b3 square and not loose on c4. And now knight e5 is a way to play. Let's go ahead and put it on the board. Knight e5 with pressure here, and h4, starting the attack. And I think I'm going to leave off here. There's a bunch of different ideas in this position. First of all, notice the knight on e4 is putting pressure on the f-pawn, but the f-pawn at the moment is defended by this knight, so white is still free to push forward with a pawn storm. Second point is that there's this rook on the c-file that may sacrifice itself for this knight at some point if this e-pawn ever gets a little bit loose. And there's also the move knight to c4. It's an interesting idea, getting an attack on these two pieces. Yeah, let's erase some of these arrows here. Knight to c4. It attacks the queen and the bishop and pretty much forces white to trade off that knight for one of his bishops. So those are different ideas. And there's also h5 as a way of slowing down the onrush of the pawns. So there's ideas for both sides. Black also, if the situation on the king side is secure enough and the attack is enough moves away, Black has the idea of pushing his pawns forward and bringing his queen out. Queen to a5 is often a move in these positions. So this is the main line of the dragon variation. A very complicated situation on the board here, and fun to play for both sides. So this is a position also that can be played for both sides. The only thing I would caution you about is sometimes you run into players who know this really well, so you may get schooled if that happens. But anyway, pretty interesting way to play. So let's back up. We passed over a couple of interesting points along the way. There was one more that I just wanted to call out in particular. So if we're right here, let's go back to the characteristic move of the dragon, g6. And now if we go on a few moves, so bishop e3 with the main line, and bishop g7 and f3. Right here, instead of knight c6 or castles, which are the main moves for black, there's also a new way of playing that's been called the Dragdorf, or the Chinese dragon. So Dragdorf, I guess, is a hybrid between dragon and Najdorf. And Chinese dragon, it was called that because a number of Chinese players were playing this way. That is to play the move a6 right here. And white normally continues, just setting up this typical piece diamond-shaped setup of pieces. And then knight bd7. This is the idea. Instead of coming to c6, where it might get traded off, it comes to d7, provides some support for this knight, and also has the idea of coming to c4 in some lines and putting more pressure on the center. So this is an interesting way to play. It also has the idea of launching this pawn storm immediately, although it's a bit risky because black is going down this line without having castled, and white can follow suit. White can delay castling and just immediately counterattack with g4, g4 at b5, and we get this situation where both sides are launching pawn storms against the castled king position where the other side is not yet castled. So it's kind of interesting that it's possible to play that way. And once again, it's a complicated position with chances for both sides. The engine thinks white is significantly better in this position, so I think this is a position you'd want to enter into carefully, but I wanted to let you know it was another way to play if you were interested in it. Okay, that wraps up coverage of the dragon. Let's back up to the characteristic position of the dragon variation of the Sicilian right here after g6. If we back up, in the next episode, I'm going to look at the classical and the Scheveningen setups. So stay tuned for that. I will see you soon. Leave any comments you have in the section below. Bye.